Hello everyone, my name is Rukuto Kamo from Childline Kohima. We are so grateful to the Department of School Education, Government of Nagaland for giving us a slot to introduce Childline to you through this medium. What or who is Childline? Childline 1098 is a national toll-free helpline number for children in distress and in need of care and protection, which operates 24/7. It is a project under the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India. Childline is currently operating in 570 cities all across India and presently operating in 5 districts in Nagaland, that is Kohima, Dimapur, Mokokchung, Peren and Kiferi. Who can call 1098? A child or any concerned adult can call 1098 anytime for children in distress and in need of care and protection. Childline do not reveal the identity of the person calling 1098. It is always kept confidential. What are the categories of cases supported by Childline? There are the missing children, the runaway children, abused children, children seeking medical assistance, child labor, street children, and all kinds of children in need of care and protection. What are some of the services extended to children by Childline? We respond to phone call 24/7, rescue of a child if need arise, nutrition and emotional support and guidance through counseling, referral services such as medical assistance, temporary shelter, education sponsorship, restoration and repatriation of a child to their families in the best interest of the child. How do we create awareness? We conduct awareness programs in college, schools, churches, colonies, outreach programs through one-to-one interaction, small group meetings, and distribution of our Childline IEC materials. We also create awareness on the existence of Childline and its services and the different laws of our country protecting our children. We also create awareness on the cases prevalent in our city. Childline does not work alone or in isolation. We work along with various line government departments and agencies like the district administration, the police department, the legal department, education department, medical department, labor department, the social welfare department, state child protection society, district child protection unit, the child welfare committee, our Childline partners in different parts of the country, and all the NGOs working for children. In conclusion, we want to send a message across to everyone that even as the entire world and our nation is battling against COVID-19 pandemic, Childline is still there to reach out to any child in distress and in need of care and protection. We also take this opportunity to make an appeal to each and everyone to please call 1098 whenever you see any child in distress and in need of care and protection. Let us all join hands to make our city a safe place for our children to live in. Thank you, God bless, and stay safe.
Welcome, my dear students of Class 11 to this tele and radio tutoring with me, your tutor, Atsinyo Sekose, and this tutoring is coming from the Directorate of School Education, Nagaland. So today what we have here is the topic, the first topic, that is Thank You Ma'am by Langston Hughes. We would first try to get to understand who this author is, and then we would move on to understanding the text. So if you take a look at your text there is a little bit of background given in your text about the author. His real name is James Mercer Langston Hughes, born in 1902 and to 1967. So I want you to keep that date noted as we go along here. He is an American poet and writer, and a famous one at that. In fact, you will find that he is a leader, a pioneer in the Harlem Renaissance. Now we are going to find out what is Harlem Renaissance in detail, but for now you can understand that Harlem is referring to a neighborhood, and Renaissance is, which means revival. So he is one of the pioneers there, and he contributed a lot in the jazz poetry as well. His works reflect the working class people of the African American people, and in fact he is very much well known for his social activist during the time of during this Harlem Renaissance time. So now let's take a look at what is this Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Renaissance is dated as 1918 to 37. 1918 to 37. What is this all about? We already know what is Renaissance, which means revival, and this kind of Renaissance is happening in different kinds of countries such as French, and even in America, in United States of America, it is happening, especially among the African American people. So when we are talking about African American people who were trying to re-establish or revive their culture, that is referring to the Harlem Renaissance. So it is actually a movement, and a movement especially in the area of literature and arts. So naturally, that's why we find Langston Hughes contributing a lot even in the jazz poetry, and through their art, such as in their writings, they were also trying to revive the culture, the identity of the African American people here. And you will also find that this era is also quick within the era of Victorian era. So we already know a little bit about the Victorian era, how it is an era of transition, and how there was a lot of progress, but also at the same time a lot of immorality. So these African American people, they were trying to address those kind of social issues as well, trying to awaken the conscience of the people and trying to revive culture in that way. So you will find a lot of all these elements, and elements, not just elements but settings, even in the story that is Thank You, Ma'am. So when we say Harlem Renaissance, we are referring to, Harlem here is referring to a neighborhood. Where did it all started? The African American movement, it started in New York City, Manhattan. So our story probably also took place in New York City. So that's what we have here. And what is the condition during that time? Why do we call it as such? Some of the main characteristics are that it is very populated. Population was rising and people were living in compact apartments. Again, that is another setting that we will find in the story. And African American working society were striving hard at that point of time to re-establish their place in the society, and that is also being reflected by Langston Hughes. Now, you would find, remember I've pointed out the setting here, you would find that the setting of our story, Thank You, Ma'am, written by Langston Hughes here, is that that setting of a Renaissance background or Harlem background. You would find that the large woman lives in an apartment where everybody is not afraid of, everybody knows each other and they are not afraid, trusted each other, so they keep their doors open. She lives in a very small place with a small kitchenette and a bed, makeshift bed, and so on. So that is the kind of colony neighborhood that we are looking at. It was also a colony where crime was rising. So that will help you understand the context of the boy Roger better later on, why the impact of Mrs. Luella Bates Washington has on the boy Roger. So having understood all this context, it will help you not only understand your text better, but appreciate the art that is being reflected through by the author, in fact, in the story here. Now, we also get to see the setting here is at around midnight, that is at 11 o'clock. The story opens around at that time, and it was quite dark, as we can imagine. And yet we have a single woman walking home after work. So after work, arriving home at 11, and that is what we see here. So again, reflecting the African American working people. So understanding the context will help you understand the characters better as well. We understood that this lady is a very large, robust, which means very active, healthy woman, and who is able to fend for herself. Remember, she was able to knock the boy down very easily, or hold the boy, or drag the boy home, and so on. All these kind of things, she was able to defend herself, in fact. And she lives in a community where there is mutual trust. So remember, take the example of the open doors again, or take the example of her walking home nonchalantly in a very casual manner, unafraid. Why? Because she is in that neighborhood, or we can say the Harlem neighborhood. So that is the setting that we find in the story. Thank you, ma'am. The story plot is very simple. It is very simple in the sense that it has got only two characters, and the actions rising with the boy coming in contact with the lady trying to steal her purse. So that is the rising action. So it is very simple with only two characters involved, and the dialogues are also, in fact, the dialogues or the dialect is also very simple. It is reflecting the dialect of the African American people. So that's why you would find that certain sentences or words sounds very odd or too slang, too casual, but that is reflecting the American slang dialect. Again, characterization here, we get to understand that we are talking about two characters who are African American people. So that is the context again that we find here. Certain words such as "you a lie," "you gonna take me to jail," all these kind of things reflect the dialect, as well as it also gives us an insight to the character. Why? Because we get to understand from here that the woman or the large woman is she received minimal education. The way she speaks, certain grammatical errors in her sentences, or the kind of community or the communication, the way she communicates also reflects that. So that is the ground rule of our context here. Now let's take a look at the characterization. Mrs. Louella Bates Washington Jones, that is her real name, is described as a large woman, a robust woman, and she is walking home carrying a pocket book with a strap, and she has got everything in that bag except hammer and nail. Now this is humorous in nature, but there is a saying that poor people carry all their possessions, everything that are precious to them, in their bag, So it's something like that. That also tells us about what kind of a person she is. So that is what we have here. And she's middle-aged and elderly woman. She's also very motherly in nature. She referred to the boy as son on certain occasions, and that's what you will find here. Later on in the interaction between Mrs. Louella Bates and Roger, we find that she is a beautician. She works in a beauty salon, and which means she holds a blue-collared jobs. So at that point of time, blue-collared jobs were usually taken up by African American people, and that is again what the author is trying to portray in our lesson here. Now she's also very observant. She may not have received a lot of education here, but she's very observant. She's very witty and very clever too. Very observant in the sense that even though it is dark, she noticed that the boy is very shabby in his appearance. The boy is having a very dirty face. So that's why she said that I am going to wash that face myself this very evening, So those kind of things that we can pick up from the character of Mrs. Louella Bates. She's also a very straightforward person. She's a type of a person whom you do not want to mess with. She is very straightforward, says things as it is. So that kind of a person here. Now, if we take a look at Roger, Roger is an adolescent, probably around the age of 14 to 15. And from the story, we learned that he said that no, there's nobody at home. So remember, the encounter took place at 11 o'clock and Mrs. Luella Bates took the boy home and fixed them a supper and so on. And from that interaction, we learned that the boy is probably, in fact, neglected by his parents. At midnight, what are you doing out at midnight? When Mrs. Bates asked in that way, there was nobody at home, was his answer. So he is a child or a teenager who is having the poverty of lack of parental guidance. We would come back to that poverty later on. He is a boy, a typical boy, young boy who caught in a young troubled situations, but luckily for due to this kindness shown by Mrs. Luella Bates, he was able to change that incident. In fact, that incident impacted him and he was able to changed into a better person here. So that's what we find here. He suffers from poverty, and not just any kinds of poverty here. When we say poverty, we say people who lack the basic necessities. But in this case here, Roger does not lack the basic necessities. Remember, Mrs. Luella Bates was also mistaken into thinking that the boy was trying to steal her purse or her bag because the boy was hungry. All right, she thought that this boy is a homeless boy who was hungry and on the street trying to get food or trying to get by. But with the later interaction, we figured out that Mrs. Luella Bates was very much mistaken, but all he wanted, why he was stealing, was that all he wanted was a blue suede shoes. And probably blue suede shoes were the fashion back in those days. So he wanted to have that, and these blue suede shoes represents luxury status in the society. Perhaps he thought that having a luxurious items on him would elevate his social status. So again, coming back to the Harlem Renaissance here, the poet is also trying to drive home, the author is also trying to drive home the point that poverty is not only about the basic necessities. People, the society, remember he's a social activist, so the society also suffers from a poverty called lack of parental care and guidance. So that's what we see here. So when we understand all this context, we get to understand why the kindness that was shown by Mrs. Luella Bates has such worth and has such a great impact. It is very easy for a young boy to get caught in behaviors of delinquencies, petty crimes, get into such kind of petty crimes. You know, he started off by trying to steal a purse, and then perhaps later on, at this point of time, there was a lot of crimes, remember. So he could have also got into other bad habits such as substance abuse, drug abuse, and all those things. But luckily, fortunately for him, he met this woman who took care of that boy in a very single incident by not only giving him advice, but giving him $10, and also by completely awakening his conscience that it is wrong to steal and that it would lead him to a lot of trouble if he continued with that kind of a behavior. So this whole story, again, on the surface level, it sounds very simple, and I'm sure when you read it, you would be able to understand it. The language is very simple, but within it, in the context, many message or the running theme here is also being given. So the theme here is kindness. Kindness, it's all about kindness that is being shown by the Mrs. Luella Bates to the young boy, the lost boy, we can also say, Roger. So on the theme of kindness, how did Mrs. Luella Bates show kindness to Roger? Take the example when, in the first incident, it looked as though she's going to trash up the young boy, the poor boy, but she dragged the boy home, fixed a supper, and in fact, in a very motherly tone, she also pointed out that let the tap water run for a few minutes so that he can have warm water to wash his face. So see, all these kind of little things that she had shown to Roger impacted his life a great deal. So again, while they were having their supper, she is narrating her own stories, not because she wanted to talk about herself, but she does not want to embarrass the poor child. Given the same scenario, in a certain, if we find ourselves in a similar situation, perhaps maybe we would be questioning the victim or the culprit here. Why are you trying to steal my purse? Who is your father? Who is your mother? You know, a lot of personal questions may be bombarded at the poor fellow here. But Mrs. Luella Bates did not do that. So that is again her way of showing kindness. She talked about herself, her personal stories. So from her, we learned that she holds a blue-collared jobs, and yet we can get to understand plainly that she works hard to get by, and we also get to understand that she has a past. She also confessed that she has a past. And interestingly, she said that if God does not know it yet, I wouldn't even dare tell God about it. So she, by saying all these things, she is also trying to tell Roger that everybody eventually gets into or commits certain kind of mistakes. Now, at that point of time, Roger was waiting for the next word, that is but. But you find that Mrs. Luella Bates did not say that. And that's how you will also find that she is also very, she's a straightforward person. She says things as it is. You know, she is not trying to give a long lecture of morality. You know, I also have a very poor past here, but I did not go and steal money from people just because I wanted something for my own. You know, that was not the lecture, the typical lecture that she has given. So here we have the Mrs. Luella Bates, who is very wise, and in a very wise manner, through just simply offering a company of supper and discussion, she was able to brought about that change. Now, remember, we talked about poverty here, and she was able to fill in that gap in the place or in the life of Roger. Remember, he lacks parental care, and in a very motherly way, she pointed out, don't you have anybody to tell you that you need to wash your face? Now, aren't you ashamed of yourself for trying to steal money? You know, all these kind of things. And giving him $10 so that he can buy the shoe, but she also warned that if Roger is trying to get things done, then done by stealing, it will burn his feet. So again, warning her, advising, guidance was being given by Mrs. Luella Bates to Roger, which Roger deeply needed, and especially growing in that kind of a neighborhood, in that kind of a very dangerous neighborhood, he find the perfect motherly advice or guidance from this woman, a complete stranger, Mrs. Luella Bates. And she was very much right when she said that once I am through with you, you are going to remember the name Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Johns. And I am sure Roger has deeply been impacted by this person. You know, towards the end, he was trying to say, thank you, ma'am, and yet words failed him. Why? Because the door was being shut. You know, he does not want to get the wrong impression or give the wrong impression to Mrs. Luella Bates. He does not want to be mistrusted by her. All this kind of, within that single conversation itself, a lot of changes was happening. And how did that was brought about? Mrs. Luella Bates showed at least the way to get things done or to show respect. So Roger also find himself, you know, disciplined by Mrs. Luella Bates here. And in fact, it even went to the extent of Roger trying to extend help. You know, at that point of time, we are able to understand that he is undergoing the change. So definitely this incident, this single contact has impacted his life a great deal. Now let's take a look at the aptness of the title. The aptness, the title is very suitable. Why? Because it all comes with gratitude. The kindness shown by Mrs. Luella Bates was, it found gratitude in Roger. So it is very apt. I'm going to quote this. If you think that contact is not going to last a while, you got another thing coming. When I am through with you, sir, you are going to remember Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Johns. So this was not just a material thing. Kindness was not just given in a materialistic way, but kindness was shown in terms of deeds and words, guidance, advices. And you remember Mrs. Luella Bates warned Roger, behave yourself. and never to get into trouble for stealing and so on. So yes, the title is very much apt. So we have here a very simple story, which is also brought out in a lot of humorous manner. Humorous here in the sense that you know, a lot of funny incidences took place when Mrs. Luila Bates caught the boy, the young boy. She shook the boy in such a way that the boy's teeth started to rattle. You know, that is also humorous. And you know, the boy thought that Mrs. Luila Bates is going to take him to jail, but what did she reply? Not with that face, you know, I'm not going to take you to jail with that kind of a dirty face. So see, we also find that Mrs. Luila Bates is quite humorous in nature. And again, in the phrase where I have done things, neither tell God if he didn't already know. That kind of a tone in Mrs. Luila Bates' conversation also brought out a lot of humor in our story. So here we have the context of Langston Hughes' perspective on society. We have the context of Harlem Renaissance. We have the context of kindness, and all these things are creating the social milieu, the social environment in the story, and what that is being portrayed in the story. Thank you, ma'am, and which is written by Langston Hughes. On that note, we would be winding up today's class. Thank you all very much for joining me.